event. I think the best approach is to start by introducing ClimaTalk, as that is the organization that I volunteer with. JP and I co-leads for ClimaTalk's COP27 So ClimaTalk is a youth-led non-profit organization that seeks to demystify climate policy and really amplify young people's voices in the fight against climate change. So we write articles, produce content, which are really written by young people for young people. We also run events like today, where we get to speak to amazing people involved in the climate movement, like our delegates. And we also do live reporting from events. So myself, I'll be at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, along with a few other people from ClimaTalk. And we were at COP26 last year, and really just going around speaking to people, interviewing people who are involved in the negotiations, and really explaining what this process is about. We're also very present across social media. I would encourage everyone to follow our pages to keep up to date, not just with our COP content, but with all our content during the year. Then I think it's also worth explaining what COP is and the UNFCCC for people that might not be familiar with these terms. So UNFCCC stands for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and is an agreement that was signed in 1992 in Rio, and now there's about 190 parties to it. And the core part of this agreement is that every year the parties come together for a summit where they can monitor climate emissions, and really further climate ambition. And that yearly summit is the COP, the Conference of the Parties. Last year it was in Glasgow, and this year it's in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. And every year at one of these summits, these parties come together to sign a unanimous treaty, which means that it's very heavily negotiated, but we often get some really landmark moments in international climate policy in this treaty. For example, last year we had the first explicit mention of coal, or phasing down of coal. And also around this, negotiating this major treaty, because we have all of these countries together and lots of scientists and people from civil society and world leaders, there are lots of other side events and side agreements that take place. For example, last year there was a side agreement on deforestation, and there's a lot of information sharing. So it's a really important moment, probably the most important moment in the climate policy calendar. So it's really exciting that today we have the opportunity to speak with people who will be there negotiating on behalf of young people, on behalf of really advancing important points within climate policy. So without further ado, let's meet our delegates. So I think if each delegate could briefly introduce themselves, maybe in about 30 seconds, before Alicia will speak a bit about CYNP, and we'll get into the main discussion. So first of all, a brief introduction. If we go to Alicia, you first.
Sure, thanks Charlie, and thanks to ClimaTalk and the CYNP for co-hosting this event. Well, I am Alicia Maldonado. I am the Peruvian Youth Negotiator for the Peruvian delegation to COP27. Also, I have been since 2020 Peruvian Youth Delegate to the UN, which also kind of brought me to climate change advocacy. I'm a medical doctor, and also studying the master's in global health policy. I'm very interested in planetary health in particular. So, thank you. Over to you, Charlie.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Alicia. Namgay, if we could have a brief introduction from yourself, please.
Good evening, everyone. I am Namgay Choden. I'm joining you from Thimphu, the capital city of Bhutan. I'm a foreign service officer, and I have also, I would say, revved up my work in the climate sector through voluntary platforms, particularly the Global Shapers Thimphu Hub, and also as a climate reality leader. I will be attending the COP27 on assisting the country delegation on the Article 6 track. I've also personally been very passionate about demystifying climate policy for young people, and this is why I really resonated with what ClimaTalk is doing, and this is why I also decided to be part of this discussion today. Thank you.
That's amazing. That's what we love to hear. And finally, on to Evelyn, a brief introduction from yourself, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Evelyn Addor. I'm from Ghana. I am a development communicator. I work with EcoCare Ghana, a right-based organization in Ghana, and we work mostly with forest range communities, trying to make sure that natural resources in the country benefit those who are closely related to it. I am also a founding member of the Youth in Natural Resource and Environmental Governance, which we work to give young people education and try to empower them to be part of the decision-making process in Ghana. I've been in youth activism for a while now, and so I'm really interested, and I'm very happy to be a negotiator for Ghana, supporting my country delegation on loss and damage at ease. Thank you.
That's brilliant. That's so amazing to hear. We're very fortunate to have so many distinguished guests with us here today who are, as young people, have already made such great careers within climate policy and climate movement. So my first question, really, for a bit more background, is what brought you into the climate movement? Why did you become interested in this area? And then how did you get involved in the CYNP? Alicia, if we go to you. Oh, sorry. Before we go into our questions, Alicia, if you could speak about the CYNP so that people know what we're referring to when we talk about the CYNP.
Sure. So the CYNP is a Climate Youth Negotiators Programme, which is enabling and empowering the next generation of negotiators at the UN climate change negotiations, and particularly at COP27. This program is co-developed by young people and experienced senior negotiators in collaboration with various UN entities, academic institutions, countries, NGOs, and further entities. And it was launched on April 22 this year on Earth Day at the Global Youth Summit in the US. CYNP is also a global intergenerational program that is aimed at redressing the systemic inequality of youth representation in negotiations and decision-making, and overcoming youth washing and tokenism by tackling the root causes and driving system change to ensure long-term meaningful youth participation in multilateral decision-making. For this first cohort, the CYNP has signed MOUs with 27 countries from all UN regions that are part of the CYNP, and it is training 58 young people who will be official negotiators for their countries at COP27, and the objectives revolve around the following. First, improving young people's negotiation and leadership capabilities needed to participate effectively in the UNFCCC negotiations and strengthen the delegation overall, as well as seeing young people as positive agents of change, and delivering systemic change by ensuring youth participation in party delegations, therefore delivering a proportional and positive global outcome. And in order to achieve the above-mentioned goals, the CYNP pursues 4 core work streams, which is bridging skill and capability gaps through tailored online and in-person training on the UNFCCC processes, as well as leadership skills, connecting youth negotiators with their peers, creating a community of youth change makers for professional networking purposes, as well as for positive peer support mechanism, removing funding barriers to participation through travel grants, and advocacy with governments to support them to meaningfully integrate youth negotiators into their delegations.
Amazing. Thank you for setting that out so clearly and succinctly. And therefore, now everyone will know what I'm talking about when I'm saying CYNP. And it's amazing that the CYNP was only created this year and is already doing such great work, as we're going to hear about today. And it'll be really exciting to see the impact that can be made at COP27. So back to the question that I was a bit too keen with and asked to assume. If you could all talk a little bit about what brought you into the climate movement, whether there was a particular moment or thing that you saw that made you realize that this was an area that you wanted to work in, and then what brought you to the CYNP. So Alicia, if we go to you first, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it started when I was a medical student. I was part of a youth-led organization of medical students, and one of the objectives also was educating global health. And this is very broad, but of course, my relationship was to climate change and health. So this interested me at the first place. But then in 2020, when I became a UN youth delegate from Peru, one of the main topics also was climate change, and I could got more involved in these negotiations and what the UN is doing, how are young people getting involved. So and so that made my curiosity grow, and I also read some books that really got me interested in like the upstream root causes of climate change. That's not also creating climate change, but also social inequalities and lack of access to basic services, so to basic human rights, actually. So that's what brought me here. And when I saw the call from the Ministry of Environment of my country to apply to be part of the CYNP first cohort, I thought to myself that this is the perfect opportunity to really engage and having young people at the table. And there are incredible youth activists here in Peru that are really inspiring. I can learn a lot, and of course, this multidisciplinary approach everyone has. Yes, I think that brought me here.
That's really interesting that you came into this area from a health perspective, because I think that's something that's really overlooked often, the interlink between health and climate change. I remember even last year at the summit, there wasn't a day on health, which was so surprising after the pandemic. You think that would have woken people up to how we need to address the link between those, but hopefully we can hear more about that later. Evelyn, if we come to you next, about how you came into the climate movement and CYNP.
Okay, yes, thank you. So for me, it started, I think I will attribute it to my dad. My dad was a teacher, and he really loved working in the rural communities. So I had to school most of the time in villages around the western and central region of Ghana. And then I come on vacation to the cities where my mom and my other siblings also, because I'm a daddy's girl, follow my dad to wherever he was teaching. So then I started seeing the inequality that exists even between people living in the cities in Ghana and those living in the villages. So when I finished uni, I really just wanted to be a journalist so that I could tell stories of how inequality is happening in Ghana. I trained as a journalist, and my first job, my editor assigned me to become an environmental journalist, an environmental reporter. That opened my eyes to a whole new problem that I didn't even know existed. And so eventually my editor, who was also a campaigner at the time, was like, okay, he had a project and he wanted me to be on it and I thought to myself, just being a journalist and reporting on the issue without doing anything about it wasn't really enough for me. So being part of the solution, after seeing all the problems in the environmental sector that existed, I was excited to be there. And then there was the Ghana decided somewhere 2014, we were having an energy crisis, and we decided, our government said they were going to start a coal power plant in Ghana. And then a lot of young people came together and said, no, we don't want coal. So we started a whole anti-coal campaign, and our coordinator at the time went on to win a Goldman Prize. So with that in mind, with that anti-coal campaign, I just became an activist, left journalism, and full-time took on communication roles in NGOs within Ghana, and that's how I ended up here. But with CYNP, I was recommended by the EPA because we've had a network with EPA as a youth group, and we would often go to the Ghana lead negotiator and talk to him about youth participation. So when the opportunity came, he actually recommended me for the position. So thank you.
Wow, what an amazing story. And I imagine that you use those communication skills developed as a journalist a lot as a delegate for COP27 and will be when you're there. Namgay, if we come to you next to hear a little bit more about your background and how you came into the climate movement.
Yeah, before I start, I must warn everyone that I have a cough going on, so I might break into a fit anytime. So please excuse me for that. So my climate journey, I wouldn't be wrong if I assumed that many of our participants here today perhaps are hearing about my country, Bhutan, for the first time. Bhutan is a small country right in between India and China, so two giant neighbors. Bhutan is also a mountainous country that is highly vulnerable to climate change, especially considering that our major sectors, so agriculture and hydroelectricity, are, again, extremely vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So in that sense, the climate crisis has always been at the forefront of my attention. I was away from my country for 4 years for university. I studied in Singapore. And when I came back, I decided to join the civil service. So basically the government, because as a young person, I felt that I want to be part of all the policy conversations. So I started in 2020 in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and my climate journey started in a very different way. Right when I started working, the pandemic hit, and I was frankly left without a lot of work because I used to be in something else. And then I got onto the Global Shapers Thimphu Hub, and also I became a climate reality leader that year. And these two things really kicked off my curiosity as well as my passion, and then my commitment to work in the climate sector. I started a project called the Bhutan Climate Futures Lab, which aimed to demystify climate policy and international discussions and then how it relates to national conversations and national policies. And the project is currently ongoing, but luckily for me, I was also assigned on the climate policy desk right around that time. So this is really when I got into the negotiations and the intergovernmental discussions part of it. So this is what brought me to the space, and what motivates me to continue to remain in this space is the fact that right around the time when I was on the climate desk, I started to talk to a lot of young people. Unfortunately, I kept meeting with a lot of apathy, and also just sheer dismissal on what was happening. But I also realized that these barriers are there often because young people simply don't have a lot of opportunities or platforms to engage with climate policy. And this is what I've always strived to do as a young person in government, that we need to elevate youth conversations on climate, and also in turn enable young people to work on their own climate initiatives and own the narrative. I was reached out by the National Environment Commission to be part of the CYNP in recognition of the work that I have done through the hub and as well as through my work in the ministry. And I would say that attending the COP27 really is the culmination of all the effort that has gone into in the last 2 years.
Wow, what an amazing journey. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I think it'd be of great interest to people on the call to see how you've all come from quite different fields, really, healthcare, journalism, the civil service, which says something about how climate change is affecting all sectors, but also how people with lots of different experiences should feel that they have something to offer to the climate movement and should get involved if it's something that interests them. Now, if we move on to the work that you're each doing with the CYNP, I think people would be really interested to hear about the training you've had or your experiences of being in CYNP so far, and specifically the skills that you have developed in this role, and maybe the skills that you think are important for being an effective negotiator and delegate at a summit like COP27. I appreciate that's quite a big question. So Evelyn, if we go to you first.
Yes, thank you. So CYNP has been amazing. The training, this is my first time as a negotiator. I mean, I've heard of negotiations. Last year, my friend and I were so excited. We said, oh, we will enter the negotiation rooms when we went to COP for the first time, but we didn't have access because of COVID and other restrictions. So CYNP, but I really had very little idea of what really goes on inside the negotiation rooms. And even like I knew about UNFCCC, but I didn't even know how big the whole process was. So first of all, CYNP has just opened my mind and my eyes to what the whole process is. I have learned a lot. When it comes to skills, it's been A lot. I mean, we've had the opportunity to meet so many amazing speakers, amazing personalities. And one of the things that I have learned over the period is just listening, taking your time as a negotiator to listen to what the other person is saying, and also knowing that we have different positions, but at the end of the day, we have one common interest, which is to make sure that we achieve the aims of the Paris Agreement. So no matter what positions other countries are taking when we go to the negotiations room, I have in mind that at the end of the day, we have one shared interest. And I think focusing on the interest and getting to understand people's perspective and knowing that they also have the same interest as you, the best, we all want the best for the world and to protect our climate, is one thing that I'm going to take on and use as a lesson going forward. I mean, and as a negotiator, when I go into the room, just taking my time to listen and really meet with people that share the interest that I have and for my country. That is a skill that I've picked up that I'm going to even use beyond the negotiations. Thank you.
That's so great to hear. And I feel like if everyone was going into these negotiations with the same perspective, appreciating, the bigger goal of what we need to tackle, this is probably the last COP we'd need, because we'd get things done. Unfortunately, a lot of people go in with other motivations and things, and I think that can sometimes cloud the negotiations. So it's so great that you have that perspective of the wider goal that needs to be achieved. Namgay, if we come to you next with the same question about your experiences in CYNP and the skills you developed.
Yeah, so I'll talk about my CYNP experience in 3 points. The first and the most important really is that the CYNP has truly been committed to access and opportunity. It's incredible that there are 3 of us here, women and very young and from the global south. And when you have programs such as these, I think it's incredibly useful, not just on a personal level, but even at a national level, where a lot of people in our situations would have a lot of challenges to be able to access spaces such as the COP27 and to have a meaningful say in it, because we're not going to attend the sideline events, but we're actually going to negotiate there and be part of the country delegation. Which brings me to my second point. I think what the CYNP has done is to make us confident in terms of being comfortable in spaces like the COP27. I think it can be quite intimidating for very young people to go in and actually go in as negotiators. And to be frank, I am very nervous, but I think with the training and also through the various conversations that we have been able to have with people who've been in this space for years and years and years, this has certainly given us the confidence. And this brings me to my final point of, a lot of people here might also be wondering how we actually got this opportunity. And all of us said that, okay, our governments reached out to us, but I also understand that in many contexts that may not really be possible. And I've kind of been thinking about how to go about it. And to that, I would say that it's important to exist in ecosystems of various platforms and networks that enable you to engage across your community as a whole. And this has been key in my own journey because, as I previously mentioned, my climate journey didn't begin in my ministry, but it was quite, I had to go around a couple of different roads to really bring me here. So we have to work more towards intergenerational allyship, but also allyships across different sectors that may then enable us to be put in these positions where then we're able to get opportunities to go there. But I'm happy to hear from the rest of you too on the local context that you all work within.
That is really great to hear about the work that CYNP is doing, and how it's especially making you feel more confident going into these negotiations, because I think that is something that young people suffer with a lot, feeling like they don't know enough, that they, like you say, don't have the right connections to be able to make a difference. If I can actually come back to you really quickly on that point where you said you were having these discussions with people that had been active in the movement or that space for a long time, how was that sort of building your confidence, and how else has CYNP built your confidence?
To me? Okay. So I think one of the most memorable sessions I had was with somebody who was working in the health space, and how even the WHO now is going to have a bigger stake in the climate negotiations. And ultimately, it is all connected. So for me, to be able to make that connection was really amazing. I think it was truly an insight. Second most memorable session was with the OG herself, Cristina Figueres, and to be in the same room as someone like her, and for her to, really put a lot of confidence, and also to be able to hear what her experience has been like, and to hear what still keeps her here, still keeps her in that space. I think it's all these things that gave me the confidence to be able to go to COP27 and say, I'm going to bring my best game to this.
That's so brilliant. That information sharing is so crucial. And hopefully that's what we're doing for other people here today, sharing these important ideas. Alicia, if we could come to you next and ask the same question, if you could give us some insight into your experience within CYNP, the skills that you've developed, and what skills make an effective negotiator or delegate.
Sure. So first of all, it was very important that the program started with the general introduction of the UNFCCC and how complex it is, because sometimes like all the UN system might be very complex for a young person to understand. So that was really important, and also about speaking of all the history behind of the past COPs and the main highlights of the COPs during all this time. So that was really important, because you need to go with a good background to the negotiations. Also, in regards to negotiation, all the technical terms, all the how language affects a lot on decision making, how different groups of countries work together, and also the positions. And we had a very nice session where we had a simulation of a negotiation, and we had to prepare ourselves in regards to different positions around loss and damage. So we could learn in this negotiation, like in the preparation and also in the simulation itself, we could learn how to look for all the relevant documents for a specific negotiation, for a specific country, and also a group of countries, to learn about the position of other countries, how to develop a speech and choose the right words for that speech to be diplomatic and to also demonstrate the position. And yes, and it was led by an amazing speaker as well that has a lot of experience, and that's something I really want to highlight. The CYNP team, Bina, Hita, Mary Claire, and Sophie and all the volunteers had reached out to many amazing speakers, very experienced. So I really appreciate that, because we have learned from the best of the best. And also in regards to soft skills, which are equally important, apart from all the technical knowledge, we learned about public speaking, listening, negotiating skills. And so all this capacity building is really necessary to build confidence once we are there, because if we are there but without having any capacity building before, then we might feel a bit lost. And when speaking to other negotiators that have been to previous COPs, they always say, when you're there as a negotiator, it's very overwhelming, and really if you have all these preparation before, then you will do much better, you will perform much better. It's my first COP, so I'm really thankful for that. Also, another very important thing I want to highlight is the supporting network, because as it was mentioned before, we are all, well, most of all, we are from global south countries, and it's really nice to have like to know each other's backgrounds on climate change and what's happening to our countries and our regions, and to know that once we are there at COP, we'll have this supporting network to which for who to talk, and people like us, young as us, that has gone through all the programs. So that's really amazing, and also all the tips that the team has put into taking care of ourselves during the COP, for mental and physical health, which I believe it's super important if we're going to have a huge responsibility of being negotiators from our parties.
That's amazing. Thank you for such a full answer. And I think that really speaks to the point that, you know, without inclusivity and those support networks, diversity can be very superficial, in the sense that you need to, you know, have people there that represent different groups, but also give them the tools to actually get involved and make a difference. And it's so great to hear that's what CYNP is doing through its support network and supporting you. My next question pertains to your role as negotiators at COP. So my understanding is that you each have a topic that you're negotiating at COP. And I wanted to ask if you could explain that topic, why it's important within the climate movement, and also what you're hoping to achieve by negotiating whichever topic it is that you are. Namgay, if we come to you first, I believe you're doing Article 6, which is quite complex. It's taken me a while to get my head around. So if you could explain that to us, that would be great.
Yeah, I was also thinking of how I could make this as simple as possible. So the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement is an ongoing negotiation around the text, but also operationalizing an entire global infrastructure on carbon trading. Excuse me, my cat is, just give me a moment. All right, I'm back. So the global infrastructure on carbon trading and finalizing the text. I am, okay, so for a bit more context, Bhutan usually negotiates along with the least developed countries group, so the LDC group, and, you know, at the COP, you usually don't go in as one single country, but you rather align yourselves with different country groups along shared interests. So what is important for Bhutan, for LDCs under the Article 6 negotiations? I think there's no doubt that it's about the flow of finance from countries that have undercomplied to countries that are overperforming in terms of meeting their commitment to reduce carbon emissions. So if the LDCs are able to negotiate on terms that makes it easier for them to trade with countries that are, you know, struggling to meet their national commitments, and the money is supposed to go into projects that will ultimately lead to mitigation and reduction of carbon emissions. But particularly for Bhutan, I think it gets a little more complex. So back in the COP15, Bhutan actually pledged to be not just carbon neutral, but carbon negative for perpetuity. Now, the big question here is, you know, where would Bhutan's commitment stand in terms of being carbon negative once we become part of the carbon trading system? But I think a larger question here is also, you know, a little more on the moral side, which is to do with, you know, would Bhutan and should Bhutan be paid to remain carbon neutral, actually? So I've tried to make it as simple as possible, but like you said, Charlie, it's super, super technical. However, I want to end by saying that, you know, right now, carbon trading and the Article 6 seems to be a very, excuse my language, a sexy topic. But, you know, at the core of it, it's ultimately about really moving away from carbon completely. And Article 6 is not a panacea for the current climate crisis that we're facing. It's just one solution to move the financing. And I think all of us have to remember that at the end of the day.
Thank you for explaining that so clearly, and especially it's so interesting to hear specifically Bhutan's perspective on that as a carbon negative country, which is so rare that we get that perspective. Alicia, if we could come to you next and hear about the topic you're negotiating and what success will look like for you at the negotiations.
Okay, so it's likely that I'll be helping in the negotiations of loss and damage. So, well, this is a very important topic for, I believe, many of the countries in the global south, especially in the finance that will come from it, that is expected to come from it. So this is also one thing I really learned well from a speaker during the CYNP program that told that, for example, when adaptation is no longer feasible, then we need to move to loss and damage. And many communities are worried about the non-economic losses because, I mean, this includes lives. And it's already happening all around the world, even at the global north. But the difference is that global north is able to cope with like the financial struggles that arise from loss and damage, but global south countries do not. That's why it's important to have this finance for loss and damage, both economic and non-economic losses. So, I mean, it's a very complex topic. I mean, it's in the agenda of the COP to start speaking about the financing, also in operationalizing the Santiago network. Expectations are that global south countries can really unite and really push forward this item, because things that countries at the end, that the people that are affected by climate change expect some tangible outcomes from the COPs. So if we are postponing this about financing loss and damage, then it's really going to be very disappointing for people and for the people that are actually suffering from this. And it's like they are not going to find outcomes from COP. So if you want COPs to be like really, how do you say it, like to have real outcomes, to not be, that's where the thumb was like blah blah blah, then we really need to push forward this to make this a reality, financing loss and damage.
Yes, thank you for explaining that as well. And I think that really touches on an environmental justice point that often the industrialized countries, that's a conversation they want to avoid a lot of the time, because it involves a sort of reckoning of the impact that they've had and how historically they've, you know, benefited a lot, while other countries on the front line of the consequence of the climate crisis is suffering now and need both, as you say, economic and non-economic assistance to deal with that. Evelyn, if we come to you next and hear about the topic that you're negotiating, again, why that is crucial to the climate movement and what success will look like for you at COP27.
Yes, thank you. So I'll be following loss and damage as well, and ACE, but mostly on loss and damage. I'll be supporting the lead negotiator for loss and damage. Basically, so Alicia has said most of the things that I have to say about loss and damage already. Basically, loss and damage is about how people can go beyond adaptation, you know, the things that adaptation cannot solve. So that is what, and this year being an African COP, African nations who are like the most vulnerable, one of the most vulnerable groups when it comes to climate change, and having already started to experience a lot of losses with Mozambique, Hurricane Addor, and also many things happening right now. Everybody is really critical, looking at how we can go on and get loss and damage, the implementation mechanism for loss and damage established, so that countries can start accessing some financial assistance in case they are faced with some issues. So for the AGN, I think loss and damage is one of the key topics that is on our agenda going to COP. And so I just hope that we are able to at least, loss and damage has always been pushed aside when it comes to the negotiations, except for last year, where COP26 was brought the issue to the forefront. So this year, we are hoping that you have some established mechanisms by the time the COP, and at least we have some mechanisms that people can go to. And then the second topic I'll be following is on ACE, which is Action for Climate Empowerment. And this is about education and creating awareness about climate change. I chose this particular track because I work in the CSO space, civil society space, and I also work with a lot of young people. I have a project that I'm currently implementing, Climate Generations, which seeks to educate young people in Ghana, those in senior high schools, and create climate awareness. So I want to see that on the table. I want to see how we can expand this. What are some of the financial mechanisms for young people like us who have started initiatives on the ground, in the communities, trying to create awareness, trying to come up with some sort of innovations to deal with climate change in our specific country. So that's why I chose these particular topics. Thank you.
That's so interesting to hear about how you're almost like a bridge between these big international climate negotiations, but also the work that you're doing on the ground with people that are experiencing these consequences, and how you're able to mobilize people to make a difference. My next question is, with these lofty ambitions that you all have and that you're going to achieve, hopefully at COP27, how can other young people help you to achieve these goals? And what advice or tips would you maybe give to other young people who want to assist you in that way? Alicia, if we come to you.
Sure. So maybe in regards to the work with young people, is that it's important for us that as we are on the negotiating room, we are able to speak to as many young people as possible from many different backgrounds, learn all the perspectives. Just yesterday, for example, we had this meeting of the Alcoy of Peru that gather a lot of youth activists working on different areas around climate change, for example, in oceans, indigenous communities, having all their perspectives. For example, we had a very nice insights from indigenous leaders around the carbon markets that are important to for us to learn and to understand. I know these topics are quite complex and it involves a lot of reading, but it's different to read something than to hear it from someone that is actually working on the ground. So it's important for us to develop this important skill of listening, learning from each other, and bring that to the inputs we can have to within our delegations, our national delegations that are ultimately the parties that are taking decisions and influencing decisions at the COP process.
That's brilliant, and such a clear and inspiring answer. Thank you. Namgay, if we come to you next.
So I would say that I find it very unfair that the whole negotiation process and the entire international structure around climate action is quite inaccessible, frankly, to many young people, which really then creates a lot of barriers to engage them. I can say from my experience this time around that nobody really knows what I'm doing when I start talking about Article 6, for instance. So what can young people do? I would really say that I walk away with the strengthened conviction that I have a lot more to do as a young person, especially in terms of making these conversations more accessible to young people in my country, and do everything in my capacity to really empower them to be able to be part of this conversation as well. Of course, I think young people have to mobilize and to, I'm a little uncomfortable to say educate themselves, because I understand that it's not easy. It's easy to say that, but there are a lot of challenges for a young person to even be aware of climate change as an issue that's going to not only impact them, but also determine a lot of their economic opportunities, social opportunities. So what I would want young people in my country to do, would be to be part of something that I have chosen to really be committed, and also to really own the narratives on climate change and subsequently climate action. Because while I believe that climate action is systemic, it's political, it's also young people who make up around 70% of my country's population that really have the voice and the vote and the choice to demand more accountability and more climate action from the leaders and their governance systems.
That's brilliant. And we've seen the impact that can be made when young people come together all around the world. But it's heavy that so much expectation falls on young people to fix a problem that we didn't create. But as you say, through education, mobilizing, we can make that difference. Evelyn, the same question to you on how young people can help you achieve the goals that you want to achieve at COP27, and also, assist the climate movement more generally.
Yes, thank you. So when I went to the field this week to speak to school children in Ghana, we have like 4 landscapes in Ghana. We have the savanna, the transition, the high forest, and then the coastal belt. And these school children are in the transition zone, which is a transition between the high forest and the savanna, right? And something struck me. I asked them a simple question, whether they know if the climate is changing. And to my surprise, most of them, who are just like 15, really don't even think the climate is changing in Ghana, because they are so used to this unpredictable weather pattern that unconsciously they think that is the norm. And that really struck me, is this going to be accepted by these young people? Because they actually have most of them have no idea, or very little idea, about how the climate in Ghana used to be maybe 10 years back, maybe, or 5 years back. And most of them have grew up living under these conditions, and they are starting to think this is normal, So I think one of the things that other young people can do to help is to increase the education. Go out there if you can. If you understand just the basics of climate change, just try to educate somebody else. Just let them see what was and what is now, and what we can do to maybe adapt or mitigate it, And I think here in Ghana, I would say there's a huge youth movement when it comes to climate change. There's a lot of youth movement, young people, especially in the cities, who are really interested in the issues and who want to be part of the conversation. One of the key challenges, however, is finance, when it comes to access to opportunities to even go for conferences like COP, to educate yourself or build networks. It's really not easy for people to have the financial capability. Even when you are organizing a local meeting, you want young activists from different parts of the country to come together and meet and design policies or make recommendations to the government. It's really difficult, because most of them will tell you, I don't have money to travel to Accra or something. So access to finance and support for activists who are doing some work on the ground would be great. And the last thing is that I would want young people to also take it upon themselves to just read more, just try to understand more, and especially with people from the West or developed countries. Building solidarity with young people in Africa is really important. Sometimes just supporting one young person that you have identified as being good, like the CYNP is doing for me and my 3 other colleagues from Ghana, to really educate ourselves, to be part of the negotiation process is really important, because I know a lot of young people who would love to be in my shoes, who are doing amazing work on the ground, but just because they can't have access to finance or can't have access to any kind of support, are just stuck in their corner. So young people in developed countries who are exposed, who have other opportunities and can support young people from developing countries, like CYNP is doing should also continue to do more. That's what I'll say. Thank you.
That's a really interesting answer. And I think the point about the fact that young people are so passionate about this issue, but they just need to be given the opportunities is such a crucial point. And it's almost a microcosm of what Namgay and Alicia have been saying in terms of these finance flows that we need, that really that's the difference it makes on the ground if people have those funds to be able to meet, to mobilize, to attend summits like COP and really amplify their difference. I think if we have run over slightly, so we'll go to the Q&A section. And I believe Sarah has a question that she wanted to ask. So if we go to Sarah.
Yes, I can ask a question. I have a question to Evelyn because I personally don't know a lot about climate journalism, and I'm interested whether you think that journalism can be a deal maker or deal breaker at COP27, and what would have to happen to make it a deal maker. Thank you.
Evelyn, did you?
Okay, yes, I got a question. I think it's both ways. It can both be a deal maker or a deal breaker because depending on how things are reported, a lot of the discussions, the conversations will be led by the media. What the media puts out there is what a lot of the people would also follow. So if the media really understand the ambitions of COP27 and are really in tune to it and wants to support the agenda and really make conscious effort to speak to people whose agenda is in line with the overall agenda of COP27, I think it will make it very successful. But also, we also know how the media also is a gatekeeper when it comes to some information and also tries to portray the perception of others. So it's both ways. The media is really crucial to the success of COP27, but overall, it depends on how they want to play it. And most of us will not have much say in how they want to play it, but we are just hoping that they really understand and they will align with the ambitions for the COP.
Thank you.
I believe JP also wants to ask a question.
I did have one question, really short and more technical than intuitive for whomever wants to answer. How far are you allowed to deviate, and in what way, from your country's official position on some matters? I'm just very curious as to how it works in the sense of they tell you that this is kind of what we, you can't see my hands, but they're there. What they'd like your baseline to be, but I know that there exists some leeway in certain concessions that you can make. I'm assuming that it depends topic by topic, but I'm just curious if anyone here has experience with that or how that kind of works.
I don't know if I can answer this, but for someone like me who is in the CSO space, who is used to criticizing government policies and all that, and now being part of the government delegation, it's a bit somewhere, but as a negotiator, your first, and yesterday we learned this from Mary Robinson and Zaid of the Elders, and they told us that your loyalty is to your country at this point as a negotiator. So the position, because before the COP, you had a chance to make an input into your country's position, whether to influence it, change it, or something. So once the positions have been agreed on and you are going in there, your loyalty is to your country and maybe to the, for me, for example, the AGN's position on certain issues. So you have to stick to it and not really deviate. But I think if you have some criticism, it's better for you to maybe meet your country or your lead negotiator and let the person know what you think can be changed, but not when you are on the floor negotiating. You can't just go and divert when you're on the floor. That would be a disaster for your country. Thank you.
Alicia or Namgay, did you have anything else that you wanted to add on that point about the actual technicalities of negotiating?
Well, actually, I think Evelyn summarized it pretty well. The loyalty to our party is crucial. Maybe maybe something we can do is like having more emphasis on a certain topic that is of our interest, or maybe, for example, in my case, I really like the connections between health and climate change. It's like volunteer to maybe I can go to some side events that speak about this, and maybe take notes and bring that back to the delegation, so that these are inputs not only for this COP but also for the NDCs or for next COP, things like that, like to kind of add our perspective or inputs, but in a way that, of course, the position is very respected, as Evelyn said.
Well, I can only speak from how I would approach it. And if I may offer a reframing, I wouldn't necessarily look at it as, loyalty to your country's position, because I feel that that's perhaps not the best way to go about it. Of course, you have positions, you have interests, but, in a negotiation, it's really not a debate. And to be very frank, things are very unfair. The power dynamics are sometimes heavily in the favor of a bigger, more influential negotiating bloc. And sometimes if you do get in a situation where you do need to make a concession from your side, and it's only you pushing for it when the rest of your delegates wouldn't agree to it, perhaps there is value in dissenting. And if you think that a concession would help us move things forward, not just in the interest of a country or a bloc, but for humanity, I would really think that it's worth deviating a little bit from a traditionally held position or narrative of that particular bloc.
Thank you, folks. I appreciate the diversity of responses. I've always been very curious as to that aspect from the negotiations. Appreciate it.
That was a great question, JP. I think Mariam also has a question, if she would like to ask.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hello from Georgia. It's not United States. Georgia is the flexi country. I hope you know it. Actually, maybe it's already have been answered partially and I missed, but let me have this opportunity. I saw here a very passionate young generation who are suggesting and trying to make their impact to mitigate climate change, and even so patient to be involved. But that I would like to say, even in my group as a country contact point for Conference of Youth, COP27, and now the party overflow delegate for the Georgian team for COP27, I would like to say, based on my personal experience, how we are facing lack of financial obstacles. And another part what I wanted to include here, which I now want to, and sadly I had to cancel all my session which I was facilitating during COP27 because I wasn't allocated enough money, or there are no local organization who was able to provide sponsorship. And I was got an idea, because this was very good experience, despite I'm now vaccinated from the rejections, my psychology is most now persistent. And I would like to offer that, what do you think if we can all together push the UNFCCC or through the younger, because UNFCCC have the amount of people who they fund from government and from each country, and they're investing. Why not to have a youth? Because I did the research with UNFCCC people, reaching them on social network and interviewing them, and I got that UNFCCC not able to fund young people to attend COP or even COP. What if we can all together have joined, and for the next year have made UNFCCC think that they have to pay countries some like country contact points or youth delegation be presented in a COP, and they can fund these young people. Because if we want to be heard, if we want to participate, and if we want to have it transparent and equal to everyone, it have to be like this opportunity, because some people are able to get funds or from family or from parents, but it is not like the changes, because most smart people staying off of the COP. Even within the Yongo, which is very nice initiative and organization, I will take, which is a member, which is so big. And for me, until now, I can't understand how this selection process of funding is going, but most funds going to South Asia. And it is logical. I am not against of it. But what for the people who is from Europe, who is from the like Eastern Partnership countries, they are maybe part, we have part in Yongo, but they are stay away from the fund. It's not a Yongo's problem or challenge, it's from partners. But as a Yongo have the constituency power, I think that it is possible to allocate some money and like divide it per countries. And my idea, maybe if we want to have productive youth engagement or some policy and decision makers pushing them to listeners, it have to be divided by the chapters to each countries. Because every seat, if you will look through the Zoom, to every Zoom and some screenshot, you will see that the same people participated. And I see here the same people again. And you know, then I'm asking myself a question, how many people we are part of Yongo? Because, you know, these people is patient. I'm not talking about myself. I see how this in chat really want. And this was my feedback and question together, what we can do. I will finish here. I spoke a bit longer. I apologize for that. And yeah, I always talk a lot, I know.
Thank you for your question. Yeah. I think that touches on a really important point that has come across what the delegates have been saying about these flows of finances and helping young people access those. Would one of the delegates like to respond to that point about how to help young people access finance, or maybe how we can reform the UNFCCC or Yongo to help that happen? Big question.
Yeah, so I would like to, I picked out two things from Mariam's comment. The first is, of course, more meaningful commitment to actually fund young people to be able to come to the COPs would be a welcome move from the UNFCCC, especially considering developments such as the recent UN Secretary General's initiative, firstly on appointing a youth envoy and then actually having a youth office within the United Nations. So it would be ideal for the UNFCCC to have something along those lines as well. But to your point on perhaps the same people showing up every year, I think that's a little more complex because, you know, when you go there, especially as negotiators, I think you do want some sort of continuity, and it mustn't necessarily be viewed as taking turns that, you know, oh, you went to the COP15, so in the COP16, you want to send someone else. So there is a lot of value in having the same people go and negotiate because they have the institutional memory. But on the other hand, of course, on the sidelines, on the many, many, many other things that the COP also is, apart from the negotiations, of course, I think there have got to be more young people involved, more voices involved from different sectors, and to make it truly a collective global voice on what we're going to do about climate action.
Yes, go ahead.
Maybe I can add to that it's a very important point what you're making of the same people in the COPs, and it's like I really think that if we are aiming to have more funding, I believe we have a great opportunity that Namgay mentioned, the UN Youth Office. So this is now recently been launched, and the idea is to work across all the UN system to engage youth participation. Something that comes to my head, it's like maybe building a trust fund. And you know, from a previous experience as a Peruvian youth delegate to the UN, to other meetings, there is this problem of lack of funding there's already an existing trust fund at UNDESA for UN youth delegates, but it's not funded. So that the problem is that it's like to increase the awareness on the people that really that they can finance this, on the organizations, governments that are able to fund and that are interested in youth participation, to really finance these trust funds. And I hope that the UN Youth Office could really have this on their priorities, to increase funding for young people to participate in an equitable way. Because, for example, in Peru, there are many indigenous young leaders that would have great ideas to share at the COPs or at other UN meetings, but don't have the funds. External cooperation is helping them, but not all of them, because it's not only like the flight, it's also having a safe accommodation. It's like the funding involves a lot of things, and it should be done in an equity basis. In regards to having the same people always year by year, I believe it's important that, as Namgay mentioned, like the experienced people to maintain, like, I mean, it's good they keep going because they keep building more like a capacity in this, and it's important that all that capacity they can teach it to people that are new to the COPs. And that, for example, in Peru, we have 3 youth negotiators now, including myself. Before there, this like space was not open, but now that it's open, the idea is that next year it's not 3, maybe it's 4 or 5. I don't know. The idea is to make these spaces grow bigger and bigger each time. It of course involves more funding, but the idea is that the ones we are here now that we're attending COP is to raise awareness in the people, organizations, external cooperation, etc., that have money to fund, to let them know this is very important. It's important to have the young people here in person, not only in person, with all the funding, I mean, because it's really costly, but it is really worthy. So I think that's our responsibility for the ones that are going now, to open more spaces for the young people in the future, just as the CYNP team did, because they already have a lot of experience on their own, and they are opening this big space for many young people at the negotiating table.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Alicia. Evelyn, did you have anything that you wanted to add on to that?
I think they've pretty much summarized everything. So let's move on to the next question.
Okay, perfect. I see that we've gone slightly over our time, so I feel like we should maybe move on to our concluding remarks. I was wondering, a lot of people can sometimes feel like the COP process is very slow, and so they question whether progress is being made. So I wonder whether each of you could provide a sort of wrapping up remarks about why you have faith in the COP process as you're all delegates, and maybe a few inspiring words for the people attending, maybe 30 seconds each on why we should still be hopeful in the COP process as young people, and a concluding remark if you have anything else you'd like to add. Alicia, if we go to you first.
Okay, I'll try to be very brief. We need to trust COP because it's the only multilateral mechanism that we have. So it's like, if it's, I know it's slow, I know it's maybe not working as we would like to. I also have a lot of criticism on my own, but I believe that we need to make this mechanism to improve this as much as we can on our own, from even if we are from civil society, if we are from a negotiating party. We really need to push that forward. Like, there's no other option really, because it's the only multilateral mechanism that we have for this.
Thank you. If we go to Namgay next.
I second Alicia. I think the entire Paris mechanism is based on global cooperation, and it is only in our interest, and it is also our responsibility to have faith in the process and to do our best to strengthen its mechanisms rather than undermining it.
Brilliant, thank you. And Evelyn, finally.
What I'll add is that, I mean, without COP, what else do we have? We don't have any space for developed countries and developing countries and least developed countries, however you want to classify, to meet and to even have a discussion on the way forward. How do we save our planet? Because as we all say, there's no planet B. And so even though, yes, as someone working in the CSO space, we've always also criticized COP. Like, at the end of the day, last year in Ghana, there was a huge blowout after COP. Like, what did you guys bring? What did you, but it's better than nothing. And I think that if you look at the history since the COP process started, at least major achievements have been made, major steps have been made. And I think if we keep going on and keep believing in ourselves and focus on the shared interest, which is to save our planet, we would eventually get there. And I think we would be able to achieve the net zero that we are all hoping for. So that's my last word. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn. I agree that we all have a bit of a love-hate relationship with COP, I think, but with delegates such as yourselves, I'm sure we can achieve something great this year. I just want to say thank you so much to Alicia, Evelyn, Namgay. We really appreciate you taking the time to come and speak to us, and you've just been so informative, so inspiring. We hope you've enjoyed today's event. Also, thank you to everyone who's come along and watched. We hope you've learned something and enjoyed the discussion as much as I have. This has been really brilliant. This concludes our event. So thank you very much. And we hope you move forward, remembering the important messages that have been shared today. Thank you.
Thank you for being a wonderful host, Charlie. Appreciate it. And thank you all for participating.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye. Bye.